Well, no, not exactly. No, not brassed off. It's just I think it's the association of this of the Dalek question. You know, this mechanical, mobile object that I'm beginning to find it, distracting, and they were difficult to play to, because you're not looking into human eyes. You know what I mean? You're looking at a metal object moving about with a voiceover.
But it so much captured the public imagination.
I liked it, yeah.
Do you think you'll ever shake it off?
Oh, yeah.
How?
Of course. By making a success in something else. That's an actor's job.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Piece of Purves podcast. And this one is a little different from my previous ones in that here I'm not interviewing anyone in particular. I thought you might appreciate my remembrances of William Hartnell. So, Remembering Bill Hartnell is the name of this one. I had to think hard about how I was first aware of him. My mother loved going to the cinema, and although she was very busy running our hotel in Blackpool, she would take one afternoon off each week to go to a matinee. And in my school holidays, she would usually take me with her, from the age of about 6, I think. And that continued until I went to boarding school at the age of 9. Now, thinking back, I certainly saw some unusual films for a youngster. I particularly remember some torrid nonsense called Forever Amber, which was quite inappropriate for an 8-year-old. It starred Linda Darnell, a rather striking redhead, and Cornell Wilde. I also clearly remember and was terrified by Gone with the Wind, which was re-released just after the Second World War. Again, I think I was about 7 or 8, and for years remembered the awful scenes of a field hospital during the American Civil War and the dreadful fire that destroyed Atlanta. I can still see those images today. Scary stuff. But I came to love the cinema and was mostly undamaged by it. I know I saw Brighton Rock when I was about 9, and even though he was not the leading actor, that was Dickie Darling himself, Richard Attenborough. But Bill Hartnell as one of the gang members stood out for me. And a few weeks later, I saw Odd Man Out starring James Mason, and immediately recognised Bill as a barman. There was something about his presence that I found very charismatic, even in such a small part. So when I went to London with my parents for a holiday in 1950, when I was 11 years old, we saw the musical Annie Get Your Gun, which I loved. And one of the plays we saw was a comedy called Seagulls Over Sorrento at the Apollo Theatre in Shaftesbury Avenue. And although the principal actors were Ronald Shiner and John Gregson, there was Bill knocking 'em dead in a big supporting role. I don't remember all the films I saw him in, but I do remember him as a detective inspector in a film with John Pertwee called Will Any Gentleman, and him playing an army sergeant in Private's Progress. And of course, that led him to reprising the role in 50 episodes of The Army Game on television, and that really cemented his reputation as a very good comedy actor. But I suspect I'd also typecast him because it was followed with Carry On Sergeant and The Mouse That Roared. I don't remember watching films because he was in him, only that I always recognised his talent and was glad to see him playing the rugby club scout in This Sporting Life, which was a complete change of character for Bill. He later told me it was a part that got him the role of Doctor Who. And although his northern accent wasn't up to much, I can see why Sidney Newman and Verity Lambert had decided he was the man for the job. His acting class had really shone through, and he himself was very proud of that performance. I watched the first episode of Doctor Who in a poky little 2-room flat in Streatham and was transfixed. The whole concept was remarkable to me. No doubt Sidney Newman's concept of the show was that it was to be different from anything the BBC had done before. It had an intelligent approach to both drama and storytelling in the same way we'd all enjoyed Saturday morning cinema, good stories and clever cliffhangers. I was hooked, not only on the show, but on Bill's playing of the Doctor. Knowing what he'd done before, this was quite a revelation, and that admiration has never left me. I'm asked so often about who was my favourite Doctor, and I can never say anyone other than Bill Hartnell. Without that great performance, I doubt we would still be talking about Doctor Who more than 60 years later. I wasn't always able to see every episode, but I continued to enjoy those episodes I did see, and Bill grew in stature over his first year in the part. The whole original cast was excellent. Carol Ann made the perfect granddaughter, and William Russell, absolutely looked the part, having made his reputation as a film and television star in the adventures of Sir Lancelot. And Jacqueline Hill's solid performance as Barbara was a joy to watch. Actually, Russ had appeared with Bill in the second feature movie, To Have and To Hold, back in 1951. That was in the days of double features, 2 films in the same showing, usually a top feature and a filler. Those were the days. My acting career at this time was just beginning to grow. At 17, I had auditioned for the local repertory company in Barrow-in-Furness, where my parents lived, and had been cast in 2 plays during my school holidays, for which I earned the princely sum of £5 a week. Then, having been a teacher for just 1 year in Hackney in East London in 1960, and I gave it up for a life on the stage. On hearing from my mother that I was already wearing out shoe leather on the streets of London trying to get an agent, the artistic director of the Renaissance Theatre Company, Donald Sartain, sent me a telegram. Do you remember them? Telling me that if I was serious about acting, then there was a job waiting for me in Barrow. I can't tell you how quickly I packed, and I was in Barrow the following day, and that's where I stayed for a couple of years. At the end of that, having returned to London, life wasn't easy. I had got married in Barrow, and my son Matthew was born at the end of October. We'd rented a bedsit with a cooking alcove in Warwick Avenue on the top floor, 96 steps with no lift. I'll never forget those steps with the bathroom was 2 floors down below, and a half hour's walk from the Labour Exchange, and I set about trying to get work. Well, I didn't get anything from the Labour Exchange, but I did get an agent, and I managed to get a 6-week tour from the Wimbledon Theatre, followed by a 2-week engagement also there and in Westcliff, before managing to get into the Derrick Taverner Singers for a season at the London Palladium. Well, the job was supposed to run for a year. It was called Man in the Moon, and it starred a comedian of the time there, starring Charlie Drake. It was quite dire, absolutely dreadful. I'm surprised it lasted as long as it did. 3 months was enough, and it came off. So the search for work continued, and eventually I did get a small part in a very popular 60s show called Z-Cars. And from time to time I got several other small parts before eventually landing a leading role in an armchair theatre production for ITV. Now that was good enough to get me a part in Doctor Who a few months later. Jumping on to 1965, Richard Martin, true to his word, having enjoyed my performance in the armchair theatre, cast me as Morton Dill in episode 3 of the Doctor Who serial The Chase. A couple of weeks after being offered the part came the great day of the first rehearsal. Obviously, I was apprehensive about how well I could play the part, but I knew it could be quite funny. But how far could I, or rather should I, go with it? But on arriving in good time at the Territorial Army Drill Hall, about 30 yards from Shepherd's Bush Green and just a few hundred yards to the wonderful BBC TV centre on Wood Lane, I walked into a room full of stars I'd known from my film and TV. Maureen O'Brien was now well known to me from my viewing of Doctor Who over the recent months. And there, in the midst of them all, was William Hartnell. The nerves started, and it was hard for me to keep them under control, but Richard Martin introduced me to the cast, and I shook hands with them all. Bill very politely said, "Welcome, young man," before turning back to have a discussion with Richard, and that was it, really. I was very impressed how smoothly everything worked. Sadly, I can't remember who the PA was, but he called us all to watch as he described what each of the marked areas on the rehearsal room floor were. I paid great attention to which bits were where I would be playing Morton Dill on the top floor of the Empire State Building in New York. As always in these rehearsals, we start at the beginning and work our way through the whole show, so I was able to watch the team at work prior to my scene. And as time passed, my nerves completely vanished, and I began to think about exactly how I should play the part. Let's face it, Morton Dill was a total idiot, but I wanted to make him as gauche and believable as I could. What would you do if a time machine landed where you were, and out of a small police box come 4 people who ask you what year it was? I think you might be quite freaked out, don't you? I'd already decided what voice he would have, so the rest was all about whatever movement I was given in respect of the other characters. Bill never said anything at first, but I did see him smile a couple of times. And after we'd spent some time rehearsing with the Daleks, we went through the whole scene with hardly a break. I have to say Bill and Maureen did laugh a couple of times when I was being at my most outrageous. And when we had a break, it might have been for lunch, I can't remember, but Bill came over to me and he told me that it was very funny. Well, honestly, I was glowing. We both smoked at that time, and I offered Bill a cigarette, which he took, and we chatted a little, and then he said that a gesture I was making was just a little bit too big. He told me something I've never forgotten, and that is that television is often quite small, so big gestures can be wasted. He advised me to try to keep everything closer to me. My first impressions of him were that he was a much younger man than I'd thought, and that he seemed a genuinely friendly person. So I felt absolutely at home with him. I'd expected to be in awe of him, and I suppose that in a way I was, but there was nothing unapproachable about him, and I could tell I was going to like him. Prior to joining the show, I'd never met anyone who knew him, so his reputation came only from his acting that I had seen. Over the next couple of days we chatted from time to time, and I really felt I got on well with him. However, there were things going on of which I had no knowledge at all. Maureen O'Brien told me this 50 years later at a Comic-Con in London. I'd no idea that at that time Russ and Jackie had previously decided to leave the show after the last episode of The Chase. They would have completed 80 episodes. Well, Bill was very upset that his 2 companions, his 2 working colleagues, who he'd known from the beginning of the show, were leaving him. Now, Maureen knew how he felt, and she saw just how well he and I were getting on, so she went to him on the 3rd rehearsal day and suggested that as no replacement had yet been found, that I might fit the bill. Her description of his reaction was that it seemed like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He immediately contacted Verity Lambert, who I'd not met previously, and asked her to take a look at me at the producer's run on the Thursday afternoon, and again on the recording on the Friday evening. Well, I must have done something right, because after the recording on the Friday, I was invited by Verity and Dennis Spooner, the story editor, to join them for a drink in Studio 3. That was the pub across the road from the Riverside Studios. It's still there, by the way. Once there, and over a pint, they told me that Russ and Jackie were leaving in 3 weeks, and would I be interested in taking over? Well, you can imagine, I almost dropped my pint. Bill Hartnell changed my life, and for that I'm eternally grateful. As I said, I only found out the truth of that what happened, that Bill was responsible for me being in a major television series at the age of 26. Having grown a beard, I arrived at the rehearsal room again for the final episode of The Chase 3 weeks later and played Stephen Taylor, a space pilot from the future Earth, and when the episode was aired, no one commented on the fact that I was the same actor who had been such a twerp as Morton Dill. Just shows my amazing versatility, I think. But I really wish I'd been able to thank Bill for his support in my getting the job. The friendship was, I believe, absolutely genuine. Bill chatted with me often, and as the weeks passed by, he would tell me little snippets about his life. He was extremely generous to me. There was an excellent restaurant on the south side of Shepherd's Bush Green called Bertorelli's. It's a branch of the West End restaurant in Covent Garden. Excellent Italian food, and served by waitresses in pristine black satin dresses with white aprons and caps. Real throwback, but at that time it was just so classy. It was also very handy for the Army Drill Hall, and most days Bill would eat there, but he soon started inviting me to join him once a week, and he never let me pay, which was really lucky for me on my £30 per show. Bill was actually on £310 per show. He really loved his steak and red wine, and he persuaded me that my well-done steak was overdone. He ate his blue, and the next lunchtime together, I tried it. Well, I had to, because he ordered it for me, and I've never had a well-done steak since. It was so delicious, and washed down with a decent claret, our lunchtimes were always a real pleasure. He told me many things about his life, not everything, but quite a lot. I hadn't realised at that time that he was a classically trained actor. He studied at Italia Conti in London and played a lot of Shakespeare in his early career. Before I was born, he was playing in the West End, and he worked once or twice, in fact, with Francis de Wolfe, who he would meet again with me in The Mythmakers in a play called Nap Hand. And he also recreated the role of Dallow in Brighton Rock on stage at the Garrick Theatre with Richard Attenborough, just as they had been in the original film. You know, occasionally I could just catch a glimpse whilst we chatted of the Sergeant Major, which had played such a part in his previous acting life. But over it all, you know, I have to say, it was a very happy year's working relationship. Bill had this reputation of being a very crotchety old man. Well, he wasn't that old for a start, and he had an excellent sense of humour. But he was blighted with the mores of the time. He was certainly homophobic and also anti-Semitic, but he kept it to himself. Occasionally he may say something a little untoward, but he never dwelt on it, nor was he outspoken on the subject of either emotions. Nor did he ever, in my experience, verbally abuse anyone. He also did have a temper. I have to say that he never turned it on me, and I only ever saw it when he was more irritated with himself for making a mistake on set or forgetting his lines. He didn't like a couple of the directors we worked with, one of them, Michael Leeson Smith, who directed The Mythmakers, which was about the Trojan War. And Bill thought he was a clown. I have to say I liked him. There was something about him. But Michael would turn up in the rehearsal rooms in jodhpurs and with a cowboy hat and riding boots. I think Bill thought it was more than a bit over the top, and consequently he never developed a rapport with him, and he was quite curt when speaking to him. Actually, though, there were more problems with other members of the cast, and Bill was having a not too good time with the script. For instance, there was a character called King Agamemnon, and Bill just couldn't say it. He would drop into a sort of mumble. He said, "Oh, no, you listen to me, King Agamemnon." And in rehearsal, that would make him very ratty indeed. We just collapsed. I mean, it was always just so funny to his face. But he was annoyed with himself for getting it wrong. In fact, his rattiness caused a particularly amusing moment in the dress rehearsal on recording day. Bill had been quite awkward in the studio. I mean, remember, he didn't get on with the director as well, and Francis de Wolfe had to invite him into his tent for a feast. The actual line in the script was, "Come in, doctor, sit down and have a ham bone." Well, Francis was so fed up with Bill wasting time on the set over petty disputes with Michael that in the dress rehearsal he said, "Oh, come in, doctor. Sit down, ham, and have a bone." Everyone on set managed to suppress their laughter. Bill just simmered. This was also the serial in which Bill made one of his most famous gaffes, which went out on air, when explaining to a group of Trojans that he was not what they thought. He drew himself up to his full height and declared, "I am not a dog. A god." I had a drink with him after that recording, and he was actually quite upset. The other problem was that I would regularly drive the lovely Max Adrian, who was playing King Priam of Troy, to his underground station after each rehearsal. He was a very sweet man. I liked him a lot. He came up to me on the third day of rehearsal and said, "Peter, I've known Bill for years, but he won't speak to me. Why won't he speak to me?" I could only sympathise with him and say I didn't know. But sadly, I think the reason was that Max was both Jewish and gay. I guess that was probably Bill at his worst. I didn't see those traits ever again, and I did remain friendly with him, and we continued to work well together. My wife and I would take him out for an evening meal every month without fail, and he enjoyed his Chinese and Indian food, and he continued to feed me if we were in reach of Bertorelli's during the week. One of his failings was that he didn't really understand irony. He came back to my flat on one occasion. We'd moved to a second-floor flat on the corner of Cornwall Gardens in Kensington, together with some friends. Well, this particular Monday was immediately after the famous theatre critic Kenneth Tynan had used the F word in a live TV chat show the previous Saturday. First time that word had ever been broadcast in the UK. It caused outrage across the land. Well, I thought it might be amusing to wind Bill up a bit, so I just casually dropped into the conversation one time. I said, "Bill, what do you think about Ken Tynan's behaviour at the weekend?" I got the expected explosion. Bill went red in the face and almost shouted, "That was disgusting! How dare he behave like that? How dare he?" And he pointed at our television. "That box is in people's living room. Everyone's living room. You wouldn't go into someone's living room and use fucking language like that." I have to say. We all split our sides laughing. Even Bill saw the funny side eventually. My first wife and I enjoyed his company, and we had many nice evenings chatting over food. I remember actually he was generally very patient on set. That is, if he wasn't struggling with his lines, and certainly on the few occasions we had to film inserts at Ealing Studios, he was obviously total at home in that environment. He particularly enjoyed filming with Mary Chipperfield's animals when we were making The Ark. We all had a chuckle as she coaxed her elephant through the forest, saying, "Come on, Monica, come on, good girl." And this lovely, huge animal did as she was told, and appeared to love the day herself. Can't believe she was called Monica. On one of those filming days, we broke for lunch and went to the Red Lion, which is a popular pub opposite the studios, and Bill introduced me to Ian Carmichael, who was filming The World of Wooster at the studios. He'd worked with Bill several times in films. We had a most enjoyable chat, but I noticed Bill got less happy as the hour went on. I don't think anyone else would have noticed, but as we walked back to work, I thanked him for introducing me to a film icon of mine, and he just grunted and said, "Lucky man," obviously referring to Ian. And it became clear to me that Bill was jealous of his fame. I found that strange, because Bill was by now every bit as famous as Mr. Carmichael. I can't help thinking how much he would have relished the pleasure his performance now gives to so many people who were not even born when he played the role of Doctor Who. There is no doubt that Bill was getting quite ill. His problems on the set continued, but I don't think he saw the end of his tenure at that time. I remember very clearly when Innes Lloyd, the producer who took over from John Wiles, handed me my script for The Savages and at the same time told me they were not going to renew my contract. I was shocked and upset. I know I'd not let the show down, and when I told Bill I was leaving at the end of the serial, he was very angry indeed. He even said that he wouldn't have it. There have been far too many changes recently, and if I went then so would he. Well, I was flattered, but I didn't believe it for a moment. But he was truly sad with all the upheaval there had been. And of course there was worse to come for him. If he'd known of the impending doom for himself, I don't know if he would have made his views so strongly to the producer as he did, but I like to think he would. As it happens, we had so little to do with each other in the four-parter, and the ending was a complete non-event. There was no acknowledgement that I had finished, not a drink was offered by the management, nor a word of thanks. Just a complete anticlimax. Took off the costume, cleaned off the makeup, brushed my hair, managed a short and sad chat with Bill and Jackie before departing into the night for the last time. I saw Bill about a fortnight after I left. He had some business in town and we went to Bertorelli's for lunch. He was still angry and so was I, but the lunch went off well and we had a goodbye hug as we parted. And that sad figure is a lasting memory of a short but important encounter in my career. Naturally, I was sad to watch Jackie Lane's departure, which was even less significant than mine, and then to see Bill's final departure as he regenerated into Patrick Troughton. I can only imagine how he felt. His performance had been one of the main reasons for the success of this strange children's sci-fi series. He would have been proud, but I'm sure he felt he'd been betrayed by the all-powerful corporation. His bitterness shone through during an interview he gave when doing his last pantomime in Bristol. The interviewer asking him if this was his future. As a former Shakespearean-trained actor, successful British film star and the original star of one of the longest-running programmes ever produced by the BBC, you can almost hear the derision in his reply. So, how do I sum him up? He was a man with many different facets, a wonderful sense of humour, a generous actor, never trying to be the star of every scene, well-deservingly proud of his work, a man struggling to keep ahead of the illness that ultimately killed him, excellent company, but a man who didn't suffer fools gladly. In spite of the flaws he had, which were very much the Moors of the 40s and 50s, I liked him immensely. And I was recently shown an original letter sent by Bill to a fan who had asked him what he felt about losing Russ and Jackie, and amongst expressing a sadness that they had left, said, "But I like the new boy, Peter Purves, and I think we'll have a very good long time of working together." I wish he'd been right. Remembering William Hartnell? How could I possibly forget?
Grandfather!
Listen, Susan, please. I've double-locked the doors. You can't get in. Now move back, child, where I can see you. During all the years, I've been taking care of you. You, in return, have been taking care of me.
Oh, Grandfather, I belong with you.
Not any longer, Susan. You're still my grandchild, and always will be. But now, you're a woman too. I want you to belong somewhere, to have roots of your own. With David, you'll be able to find those roots, and live normally like any woman should do. Believe me, my dear, your future lies with David, and not with a silly old buffer like me. One day, I shall come back. Yes, I shall come back. Until then, there must be no regrets, no tears, no anxieties. Just go forward in all your beliefs and prove to me that I am not mistaken in mine. Goodbye, Susan. Goodbye, my dear.
I do hope you've enjoyed my remembrances of a great actor. You know, it was lovely to be able to give it all some serious thought, particularly as, you know, because of Big Finish, I was honoured to be able to play him in over 35 original Doctor Who audios. When I did those, of course, I had to remember all of his mannerisms and vocal quirks, and I soon discovered that as long as I could hear him and see him, the impression of him became easier. In the end, without being too immodest, I think it came over very well. Maureen O'Brien once remarked that it was just as if Bill was in the recording studio with us, which was really very flattering. I trust all my paid Patreons appreciate the early release of this podcast and that everyone else now has had the chance to listen. Please like and subscribe if you can, and there will be regular bonus pictures and audios for patrons over the coming months. The next podcast will be with my good friend and colleague Sue Cook, an absolute broadcasting icon. Not only a regular on Nationwide, she launched and co-hosted the original Crime Watch with Nicholas Owen. I do hope you'll be able to join me for that. Until then, adieu.